Our executive director, and our artistic team of Jon Batiste and McBride. We welcome you here tonight. Thank you for coming out on this busy kind of December time of the year. We're very excited for tonight's program. It culminates a year-long fellowship that we began. This is the first time we've done it. It's the Jazz is Now Curatorial Fellowship that was started here at the museum, kind of in the spirit of what Jon Batiste was doing here. If any of you were here, whatever that was, 9 years ago, when he first moved to New York, and he was doing a lot of programs at the museum. He eventually became one of our artistic directors, but his goal was always to find unique ways to bring people together, to celebrate the music, to share the knowledge, and that spirit has certainly taken him many places. So he challenged us to find a way to provide other young artists with that same opportunity. So the Jazz is Now Curatorial Fellowship allows young artists to not only present their own groups, but curate other live music opportunities and also curate some non-live music opportunities. So panel discussions, conversations, presentations. Last night we had the great Ndia Owens curate an event. Jerome Jennings, an amazing drummer and educator, was here sharing some information on the connections between hip-hop and jazz and the black music continuum. And that you can find that on our YouTube channel. It's not up right now, but it will be once we cut out some of the commercial music that we will get flagged for by our lovely streaming partners. But we'll get that up for you. Whitney, were you ever at any of Jon's shows that he did in that church basement over here?
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. And tonight's show is curated by Joel Ross, who outstanding vibraphonist and band leader, and doing all kinds of incredible things in the music. And this is the culmination of his 6-part curation this year. So we're really excited to have him on board. He's brought some really exciting events. Again, you can find most of those on our YouTube channel. And I also need to make sure that I share with everyone that if you did not have an opportunity to make a donation and you would like to make a donation, we make that extremely easy for you here at the museum. We have a cash box. You can drop some cash in. We have a little dip jar. You can dip your debit card in, and we'll make a quick $10 donation. You can also go on our website, jmih.org, and there's a couple of ways to donate there as well. But we're going to get things started. I'm going to bring out the curator and the Jazz is Now Curatorial Fellow for 2022. Please welcome Mr. Joel Ross.
Hey, everybody. I'm a man of few words, so I just wanted to, part of what I decided to do for tonight is bring some ladies who, whether by my experience or watching them from afar, just people that I've learned a lot from and want everybody else to get the chance to understand and learn how they navigate the world themselves. So it is my pleasure to introduce Brandee Younger, Lady Jess, and Gabrielle Garo.
I wore heels for you guys. Oh, please. But I'm not well equipped to move in heels. Hi. Yay. I'm glad that it's an intimate bunch, because then we could really make it a conversation. So I know you've been thanked twice already, so I'm going to thank you thrice. Thanks so much for coming out. So we have a few bios. I didn't want to read bios because you know how when you're reading bios, it's awkward. So feel free to read amongst yourselves, but really quickly, I'm really excited to be here with these fabulous ladies. Jessica, I feel like, did we go to grad school together? I can't remember where we met, that's why. We didn't, and by the way, we didn't plan, because we wanted the conversation to be candid. Spontaneous. Jessica said, surprise me. Where'd you go to graduate school?
I went to NYU. We both went to NYU. Or you were there.
We must have gone at the same time?
But I was never, ever on campus. So I actually met Brandee in person, I think, doing Miss Lauren Hill.
No.
I think that was the first time that we like worked together. But I knew of Brandee because my sister is a cellist and singer, and she won't work with any other harpist. So I already knew about Brandee's work. Her name is Kelsey Lou. Yeah, familiar. And so she will only work with Brandee. So I knew of Brandee, and I knew of Brandee's work long before I worked with her. And I actually, the first time we worked together, you were a contractor. You were contracting and playing that gig.
I thought sure we were on some orchestra gigs together. But, you know,
Color of Music.
harpists tend to be by themselves in a corner, so can't.
Yeah, we had one orchestral gig together. It was a Black Classical Musicians Festival down south. And then the mainstream thing we did together was for the premiere of What Happened, Miss Simone, the Nina Simone documentary at the Apollo.
Simone. Yeah.
And it was multi-level because Brandee was playing, but she also had to pull a real boss move as a contractor. And so, because I contract now, that was my first time seeing someone, like a colleague, so close in age to me, really just be like, that's unacceptable, here's your pay. Like, I had never, that was incredible for me to witness, and I'm only just realizing now that we're on this precipice of this new awareness, I guess, common awareness that Black women contractors are out here really just doing the actual, like, hard work, the grunt work.
Uncomfortable work.
Yeah.
And
uncompromising
those were
work.
long nights, but
Yes, they were.
and then Miss Gabby. I remember meeting Miss Gabby because I was speaking. It's jazz and gender class at the new school, and after the class, she came up to me and introduced herself and was like, "Yeah, I'm getting a bachelor's and a master's at once, and I'm gonna go live my best life." And she literally, yes, I remember that. And then she's everywhere now. Literally. Yeah. She kind of like knew what she was going to do, and she actually did it. Because that doesn't always happen,
Facts.
So.
Yeah, for me, honestly, it was just seeing women like yourselves, truly. And I think I might have met you, Brandee, I think it was like one time before that. Oops. I don't know. It was probably, I think it was like at a performance. You were playing, though. I don't know. But it was definitely jazz and gender at the new school. And yes, I was doing a dual degree, so I was doing undergrad and master's at the same time, so like a 5-year thing, just get it out the way. And yes, that was definitely that time. And I've just been inspired seeing women like yourself, Brandee, and just meeting you later on, like just literally in the field working with B. So it's definitely been a huge joy.
So yeah, everyone's doing the good work. So I think now there are all these conversations bubbling up and we have the conversations like with ourselves, but we don't have the conversations out loud. Really just about navigating spaces, male spaces, white spaces, jazz spaces, classical spaces, pop spaces. It's just a lot to navigate. So it's important to discuss it, but discuss it because we shouldn't have to change the way we are according to the situation, but just really know how to move in these awkward situations sometimes. So that said, let's start with one of these spaces. Which space do you want to start with, ladies? We have male space, white space, jazz space, classical space, pop space. And I think it's important to note that we all work in the straddle the fence departments of work. I don't think any of us do one thing, which is really important as a musician. If you're going to work and make a living, you have to really be pliable. Was that the word? Flexible, pliable.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, as a violinist, our fundamental, what's the word, pedagogy. Our foundation for learning is so steep in the Eurocentric tradition, and it goes hand in hand. Like learning the technique goes hand in hand with learning this specific way of learning how to do this thing. And so when I was coming up, I mean, it was unavoidable. The things that people can be free about, the way that they speak, the way they express themselves, the way that they write music. It wasn't like that when I was coming up. It was very much the opposite. So now, because I do work in the mainstream in Los Angeles, and I work here in New York, and I do more traditionally classical things here in New York. Ironically, New York is also the place for jazz, so I come back to do classical and jazz. And it is a chess game. I don't know how else to put it. Also, as a woman, as a black woman in the mainstream, you know, I often say, like, when I enter a mainstream space, it's cathartic for me coming out of the classical space. When I'm playing in a big band, it's like a huge release coming from the orchestral world. But at the same time, without that sort of formalized training, I wouldn't be able to play with the freedom that I play today. I wouldn't be able to improvise in the free way that I do today, and that's just the mechanics of the instrument. But I will say that when I go to the mainstream world, even though that's my release from having to show up, feeling like I have to show up a certain way in the classical world, because the mainstream world is so male-dominated, it is another flavor of chess to play, because I'm often in a leadership position. And if I'm the only one in the band who's a woman, but respected for what I'm able to do, but conventionally, like, I'm gonna show up together, as my grandmother would say. I show up put together, you know? And because I do mainstream work, like with Beyonce, there's people create narratives around that, and they write stories for you, and you're expected to be a certain way, and you're expected to be flexible more so than your colleagues that surround you. You're expected to address whoever's in the booth a certain way, and it's exhausting, I'll be really honest. And so a lot of, I guess for my journey now, is actually looking to the younger generation, because they're so unapologetic. They don't have time. You know, they're not dancing around anything. Try me, I'll take it to TikTok. Like, and so it's just like, I just look to them, and I'm like, all right, I have this issue. Like, can I say this? And I look online and I see it, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, shoot, I did the work so that this person can say this. Now I can say this. Even if it's something as simple as, like, I need my team to get paid. Like, I've had to confront major artists on the stage of, like, Radio City after the show to say, look, I've done this work for you and I never got this deposit, which means that the 12 people that I've hired for you are definitely not going to get paid on time. So I need to see you put this transfer in my phone from my account. I need to see you do it. And then we'll show up tomorrow night and finish the rest of the run. Like, we've had to do things like that. And I think it's a really, yes, it has its challenges, but we're in a renaissance, and it's a really liberating time, because you can look to the people who come before you and say, look, here's a hand up, here's a gig, but also, like, show me how to be an advocate for myself in a way that's different from any conditionings I had on either side of it. I'm also, like, an artistic director of a chamber orchestra here in New York. So then you've got the arts administration side. That's a whole other side. And I think the cool thing is, at this point, everything's so chaotic in certain ways that you can just boil it down to, I'm just going to say what I need, and that's it. And if people have a problem with that, I'm going to pivot and go over here. And I don't think that was an option before.
I was going to say, so what was, why couldn't you say that before? Because if you say what you wanted, then maybe you don't have the gig anymore.
Yeah, maybe you don't have the gig anymore, or maybe you keep the gig and the people in charge of hiring or just the people on the gig have taken this narrative. And let me tell you, there is no more of a chattier, more gossip-filled place than the mainstream music industry, than the production booth. It is the most like, so like, you could say what you want and you may keep the gig, but there also might be 4 other people on the gig who've walked away with different interpretations of your tone when the producer came at you sideways because you were just trying to advocate for somebody else in the room. So it's like always this risk. And now it's more like, what? I'm here. This is my value. Like, you hired me because I bring this to your project. And if that doesn't work for you, stay blessed. I'm going to go over here.
But do you think that you're able to do that because you've put the work in, as opposed to, let's say, it's your first time doing something? Would you have that same attitude?
I mean, I'll be honest. I would never, ever have been as outspoken as your generation is. I wouldn't have, no.
Because you're a woman?
I think so.
It's definitely because you're a woman.
Yeah.
And also just being a black woman too.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it.
Because definitely what Jess has been saying too is just like presenting yourself. Like when we walk in the room, like it starts from young. Yeah. Like how many women in here I've heard like smile just walking down the sidewalk, like literally from a stranger. And from there, it kind of like, in a weird way, it starts grooming younger girls. Then you hear it in school, you hear it everywhere else. And then, of course, for me personally, being a black woman, of course, we have the angry black woman, the mad black woman, even movies about it, you know? But I think kind of like what you were saying too, Brandee, it's like, would you feel comfortable kind of asserting more so like your worth or just like that confidence of who you are and what you're talking about, Jess, like if it's your first time on the gig? And I think because specifically for me, like kind of growing up in that narrative, like you have to be cool, you have to smile, you have to be sweet, you have to be likable, like, yeah, the air quotes. You have to be all these things. It's like you want to make sure, you get booked again. And it's like you hear all the time, just in a general scope, that you want to be good to work with because we should be good people, period. And that's for all people, not just the woman, not just the black woman, but for all people. But it's definitely like we're under a microscope about if we smirk the wrong way, if our eyes roll the wrong way, if the tone, if the sound frequency goes up a little notch and stuff like that. So I think over time, like when you start meeting other women, like how I met both of you ladies, you start getting more experience, you start being out here, you start gaining and recognizing your worth, because we all come into this world, I believe, with value for a fact. But it's up for us to see that at some point. And what differs for all of us is that timeline of when we do see that worth. And so when we do get booked for these gigs, when we do start meeting other women like ourselves and just other people, period, we start kind of like getting that, like you said, just be blessed, you know? Yeah. If something does not vibrate with you the right way, like the frequencies are off, the energy is not right, you kind of know, and I learned for myself, if it doesn't make you happy, don't be a part of it, don't do it. And that's kind of more of how I've been asserting that value for myself and that respect for myself for these type of gigs. And of course, there are other gigs, like things we want to be a part of, but sometimes it's not always set up.
Or you just have to pay your bills.
Yeah. Or you got to pay your bills, yeah.
So maybe you don't like that gig, but you like your rent to be paid?
You like your rent to be paid, but for me, I know like if it feels like it's taking a part of my moral aspect, I'm going to find a different way. I won't be a part of something like that, even if it's just for, you know, because after a while of doing things just for, you start realizing that's the energy you're exuding, the just for energy. And I feel like that's low-key kind of just like attracting certain things like that. But there are so many aspects. So like to bring it back to the point I was initially making, it's just like we are told to do so many things. So I think at least for me, it was kind of like I have to be nice. I have to do this. I have to be X, Y, and Z and not get called salty. Like I was in high school, literally. I was the only girl in high school like running one of the show, like one of the big performances in my school. I was the only girl, only black girl too. And of course, I'm telling a bunch of guys, you know, high schoolers too, what to do. And of course, that didn't go well. But I did what I had to do, you know. But after that, I started embracing it, you know. I don't get called that anymore. Like I never did after that.
But you know what, Gabby, you just said something very interesting. And I was just not reading, I wasn't reading. I was listening to a podcast because this woman just wrote a book. So of course I would listen to the podcast and not read the book. But I think it's called Token Black Girl. And it's got all the points in there. Like she covers everything. But what you just said, you know, you have to like don't roll your eyes, get your voice, get high pitched, basically just sort of forced to make certain people feel comfortable around you so that you don't give the angry black girl vibe off. It's just, it's exhausting, you know, that you can't be yourself because you're afraid that they're going to misinterpret you just because you're you know? Literally. It's a whole
I think,
thing.
you know, it creates a new opportunity. I think that's what I was, you know, kind of alluding to with the whole Renaissance thing, because I think as a culture, we're in a state of mindfulness and we're aware of things like therapy, and we're aware of, like, my sister talks about the art of loving self-investigation, like checking in with yourself. Where am I? How do I feel? How much anxiety do I have? In a way that absolutely nobody was talking about. Nobody was talking about.
We did a gig. I don't know if it was in the pandemic. Your sister.
Yeah.
At the Shed.
Yes.
And they were long days, but she had yoga mats over off to the side. This was the first gig I've ever done where we were lying flat. And stretching in between.
Yep, we were just like,
And
anytime we weren't playing, she was like, go lay down. Go lay down. We're in a pandemic. Like, you're working. We're all excited we're working, but we haven't been. And everything's chaotic, and I know that. And so just, like, stretch and
that
release
made
tension.
All the
and
difference.
It is like a night and day to be working in a space where people are conscious of that now and more assertively aware that there's been a problem before, and we're all like retaining damage from before.
Totally.
So
Stress,
we need to go forward in a different way.
Fibroids,
Yes,
you name it, that
fibroids.
are just like, you know, and it's from that lifestyle of the hustle.
Yeah.
No break.
Yeah.
No stretching
So I
on the
think
yoga mat.
for that reason, for those reasons, I think this is quite possibly one of the most exciting times to be a black woman in music, because if I turn to my right, there's X number of nonprofit arts organizations who are going, oh my God, we were so wrong, here's money. And then if I turn to my left, I see like all of my colleagues who are here like, yeah, let's do this, let's change this, let's get in there. And I think it's a really exciting time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were two things I wanted to ask both of you, because appearance, I don't want to forget. I have a mental plan in my head. But appearance, how important is appearance to you guys? Like, there was a time where my hair was never slicked back because of my forehead, but everything was really, really conservative. You know, the long black. I don't see anybody doing that now, except the major orchestras. Yeah. That's it. So I feel like so many groups are loosening up, which makes it more comfortable, in my opinion, for an audience to want to come come to a concert and watch, and be a part of it. But appearance, how important is that to you guys?
You start, Gabrielle.
Appearance to me is important on like a personal level, but not on a surface level, if that makes sense. More so kind of like how I feel on the inside. It's kind of like when we create art, or at least speaking for myself, when I'm creating anything, I don't want to release it or I don't want to perform it unless I feel the utmost like, like that's it. So like when I get ready, when I do anything, when I'm presenting myself, but let's start with when I get ready, you know, I want to make sure like this is the foot that I'm putting forward. This is what I want to present into the world. This is what I want to do. But not because of anybody. because like that's what I have for myself. That's what I believe. That's me when I step outside. I'm branding myself. That's my marketing. I am my marketing, like walking marketing poster, but to my values and to what I believe. And so I also think that stems into when you are just in a rehearsal space around new people, people you know, whatever the circumstances are, it's just the appearance aspect of like, what do you want to put out there? And that's all I ever think of appearance as for me, is like, what do I want to put out there, but within the values of what I control and what it means to me. And so it's never really about what someone else thinks, you know, because there are certain gigs you might get hired for and they specifically want, like, oh, we want women and we want to make sure you wear heels. I was called for one of those gigs before. It was like a summer gig. It was for someone's very fancy birthday party. I was like, okay, do it up. But it was for someone's birthday party, and it was in a backyard, like a beautiful backyard, but it was all grass by a lake, and they wanted us to wear heels down a slope. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Just for like the fetish of just like women equates to heels for some reason, and like makeup. So that's kind of like what I said before, like we're just embracing stuff like that, and I feel like we should all embrace things like that about ourselves. And so to me, appearance is just what it means for me.
But even so in, for example, orchestral settings, I think of Tia. I love Tia's hair. Yeah. You know, Tia's hair makes me feel better about sitting in an orchestra. Right. And like the hair can be as big as the hair needs to be. And being yourself, but still within the parameters of the concert block, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, it's interesting to hear Gabby talk about heels and being asked to wear heels, and like it's so crazy because you talk about it and you're like, I can't believe they asked me to, but like this is all I knew. This is all I knew. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of I told contractors way before I had any right to do so, don't hire me for weddings. I don't want to play those anymore. I don't want to be part of your like 10-girl crew to play somebody's reception on some stuff. Like, no, it's just not. It's not what I like went to school for, and I put myself through school, so I made a just ridiculous amount of sacrifice. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. But then now, like several years after I said I'm not doing it, I circle back, and one of my closest colleagues, Eric, starts a company in which he mainly is saying like, we're offering you a string quartet or a trio or for your event, but because he approached it like any business-minded person would, not as like an artist who also wants to start. He approached it like, look, he worked in catering for years. He's like, I'm meeting up with clients. I am creating customized playlists for them. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I come with my own sound system. The players that I use never have to like pack a music stand and bring a bunch of music. I have iPads for everybody. I give everyone a ride, so you don't have to worry about like catching a train out to I don't know where, you know, like commuter rail. Your whole day isn't gone. And so if he asks me to play, then I'll play, because the situation is affirming to me as a freelancer. And at that point, nobody is even worried about what you're wearing, because you've already been presented with a product that is so like professional in nature and not just like, well, what are you feeling? And yeah, we'll just be there and we'll just come in and like, we'll just wear. And that's all I knew of it. But because he approached it like a business, and because in 2022, this is a capitalist country. The end. We can't avoid that. There's no nobility in doing what we do. Business is it. I don't really know anything else. And because he approached it that way, when I play for him, I feel affirmed. I feel like my art is affirmed because I'm getting paid what I deserve, and I'm comfortable doing it. And so I just think it's an interesting time because all those elements matter. But off top, if you say, we need you to come in this, and this, you have to come correct, because somebody will call you out. Somebody will be like, no, what are you talking about? What is this so
remember
antiquated?
the
like,
dress code was woman must wear long skirts, and I showed up in
and
long
pantyhose.
pants.
And pantyhose. They were trying to make Brandee, oh man.
Moving a harp in a long skirt. You know, there's a fine line between doing your job. You know, if you work at a restaurant and they have a uniform, you wear that uniform.
Yeah.
And you go and you
Yeah.
do that job.
Yeah.
I get it. But then also, so that fine line is like, are you doing your part?
Yeah.
Am I moving the heart?
Right.
Then I'm not wearing that skirt.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Are you paying scale or close to it? No.
Union rates or not?
So I'm gonna wear these pants that allows me to,
Yeah.
do what I have to do.
Yeah.
It's just a gentle, it's a gentle dance.
I think there's more room. Yeah. And then also, like, it gets tricky because I work as a contractor. And if you know music, you know contractors are the people. A lot of times, like, I'll give Fallon, for example, or even like the Nina Simone documentary. So we were hired as a band, but Brandee was responsible for, like, she chose who was going to play, and she was kind of like the mediator. She's kind of like the go-between. And when I contract, the job of saying, like, if a producer reaches out to me and says, this is the vibe, and so we just need them to come this way because this is the feel, then it's on me to make sure that my language reflects that, but also doesn't exclude anyone. And so it's interesting because when I talk to my fellow freelancers, they're all doing this and trying to do this and working this language in. And, like, I use gender neutral language when I'm sending out a dress code. A lot of times I use style boards and pictures instead of words. I say, here's an example. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm wearing. If there's anything vague, text me separately with, like, what you're thinking of, and we can come up with something together. That's harder to do on a larger orchestral scale, but more orchestras have moved to a gender neutral dress code. And I remember, I think it was like 2016, and the orchestras I was playing with here in New York had made that move, but then I would also play for orchestras outside of New York, and they hadn't, and there was just no in between. It was just very much like,
so conservative.
You rebel and you make it gender neutral, or it's a floor-length dress and no cleavage and pantyhose and things that I had decided when I was 18 I'm done with. Like, so, I think the more women you have with that awareness that this is the tightrope we're walking on, and actually it's good work to widen your mind enough to come up with a different way to say the same thing, to just get the end vision. And I think when we actually just accept that that's what's happening, your players know that. Like, I, as a player, when somebody sends me a very mindful email about the gig, I'm like, respect. I'm half an hour earlier than I normally would be. I'm just as prepared as I otherwise would be, but I might be more pleasant on the gig, straight up, because I have respect for someone who can actually just take an extra 10 minutes to make sure that what they're typing covers everyone and excludes no one. And quite frankly, it is women who are leading the charge of that work. Whether people want to acknowledge that or not, that's just the reality. And I think that's because we've had to.
We've definitely had to.
There's a huge difference between male contractors calling me
Oh.
and female contractors calling me. Well, I know what a male contractor, send a text message, first sentence, I'm like, oh gosh, I can't do the gig. I can't do it. It's just,
It's a big difference.
It's like they've gone on autopilot.
Yeah.
And it's just like, that's not going to be a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
First sentence.
You already know this from the first word.
From the first, you can see the
always
preview.
know.
You see the preview.
Yeah.
That first little sentence.
You're saying many.
Most, yeah.
You don't even have to read the text.
I mean, it could be from a woman too.
I mean, and
but
this
like
is
you can
specific
tell how
to the
someone
industry.
addresses you. It's like you kind of know you don't want to be in that kind of a situation.
It's just a different language a lot of times. And there's a lot more that I have to do. I'll give you a for instance. Back in the summer, I played a corporate gig in Hawaii because it's Hawaii. And
I would say yes to that one. I don't care how you address me.
and the contractor, older guy, Long Island, I liked him a lot. I had no issues with him. But he's very old school. Very old school. And I would get a text from him that said, Jess, honey. That's it. That was the preview said. Jess, period, honey, period. And I knew that it was just an update about where I needed to be or a start time. But I said, nobody does this. Who does it? Like, I just look at my phone and be like, Dean. Like,
2022.
2022. And it's him and 8 women. And I know he's texting everybody else the same way. But he's not thinking about it that way. This is just how he's always been. And it's the simple thing of, because we always have to think 3 times about what we say and what we type. You see the text come in and you're like, this is someone who hasn't had to think the same way. Okay. Yeah. But I know that he's not, when he speaks to me with respect. When he texts me, he just texts as he knows to do. He communicates as he knows to do. Same gig. We had, it was a trio of violinists. This is for like an insurance salesperson's conference. It was like a corporate Burning Man in Hawaii. That's the best way I could describe it. And so there were 3 of us, and they had us in these like very cool bodysuits with electric violins, and the suits lit up. And it was very like, we were given the suits, we were given the glasses, and we were given the 6-inch heel. We all had the same shoe. So, but I know what I'm walking into. I'm like, I'm just gonna go into character as like a sci-fi violin playing, like it's fine. I'm in Hawaii, I don't care. One of our players gets held up at the airport and is replaced by a local violinist. And she's great. She's super nice. Like, everything's great. She's also 5 months pregnant. And immediately Dean's like, did you get your outfit? It's all of these bodysuits are one size. And she's like, well, I'm here now. So she gets herself into the suit. And it's like belly and suit and heel. And as we're going on stage, Dean's like, girls, okay, look. So, jazz them up. They're a little bored. Jazz them up. And maybe, and we're going to call her Sophia. Sophia, if you could just maybe avoid the profile shot. Maybe just straight on. And I'm like, what year is this? What year is this? But this is August of 2022. I have nothing, like, I didn't walk away having any feelings of negativity toward Dean. I just was like, wow, you've really had no need to change anything about how you've communicated with anyone. And if I were to say any of this to you, it would be like, oh, Jess, wasn't I nice to you? Wasn't I this? And it's like, yes, you would. And so in that moment, I'm like, this would be a waste of time for me to even pull up to point out. But if I'm hanging out with him, if I'm in the car and we're going to the airport or something and we make casual conversation, that's when I can talk to Dean about how he texts us. That's when I can bring this up. It's not in the moment. But all of those mental steps that I took to try and analyze the situation, to remind myself that I'm in Hawaii, to remind myself that Dean is a nice guy and has treated me with respect to my face, all this stuff, he never thought about. And I just think that kind of mindfulness is the thing that has kept this whole, the evolution of how we deal with each other, is at the core of, mutual respect. All of that. I just think mindfulness is at the center of it.
What about when the OGs are like, you're being way too sensitive. Can't say anything nowadays. Can't say anything. Can't do anything. At what point are we being extra? Or is it something that we just have to get used to and then it won't be a thing anymore? I don't know that's a question. It's just pondering life. If it's magic, why can't it be everlasting? Yeah, baby. So I have another, because I don't know what time it is. I'm going to check it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you guys what you thought about money. How important is it? So you know how when you get a regular job, or as the parents say, get a real job, and you're told not to talk about your pay. I don't believe in that. I really think I'm a let's talk about it because, and I don't mean like you're on the same gig and you're like, so how much?
Right.
Yeah.
How much you getting paid for this?
Right. Yeah.
On the
You know,
stage.
I don't mean it like that, but in general, talking about what we're paid so that we know what we should be paid. I'm really, really candid about it, especially when younger musicians, actually as a young girl, I may not, she's young, we're all young.
Yeah.
We are.
That's just out of Berkeley, and I gave her this job, and then she texted me like, "Hey sis, do you know how much I should ask?" And I'm like, "Yep," and just consider all these factors, and then you want at least this much because blah blah blah, and how long's the day. But I do think that it shouldn't be so taboo, because there's so much money to be made, and sometimes people are offered a job and they don't want to lose it. You don't want to kill it, so you don't want to ask for more. And I do think that it is across the board. I think maybe women have more trouble asking for an increase. It's the same thing with a gig. And of course, if a gig pays what a gig pays, it pays what it pays. Right. Every circumstance is different. But I just was curious to know how you guys thought about, what you thought about literally talking about pay.
Especially with COVID. Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt that.
No, it's okay.
Since we've had COVID, a lot of people try to pay us less.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would like to.
The monies.
I think it's a very important conversation because of the obvious. Like, we need to live, sustain ourselves. But I think also coming from that aspect of not even walking in a room once before and not even knowing the measures we can go to assert ourselves. Money has been a part of that topic. Kind of just like knowing, kind of having that thought in your head. I don't know if you did, but just assuming you're probably not getting paid the same as X, Y, and Z person that's also on the gig. But also just feeling like you can do that, can ask, can even wonder. I think for me one time, I'm like, girl, why are you wondering? Why are you thinking about this? Like, you're on the gig. But I think it comes with time, and it comes with that experience that I talked about before. It's kind of like when you build that confidence in yourself, and you know that, okay, I've done X, Y, and Z. I know A, B, and C now. So it's kind of being able to know, like, this is the lens that I don't know if I can go, but I am going to go because that's what it is, and it needs to happen. And I think also just being able to have also that knowledge of speaking to people who know more than you, have been in the industry longer than you, and kind of knowing like what a gig like that looks like. Like if you're doing like a gig, for example, like on TV, or if you're doing like a Grammy gig or whatever, kind of having that idea of like, do we get royalties after this? Mm-hmm. Is this something where I'm gonna expect 2 or 3 checks? Is this just a one pay thing? And kind of having an idea what the per pay scale is for that and what it should look like. Being more acclimated with what you're doing. Know your business, and not just going into gigs anymore happy to be here. Because I mean, when we were like a lot younger and like just starting out, I'm sure we all had that point where it's like, I am just happy to be here. I'm like 14. You called me, I'm here. Even 20, you call me, I'm here. I want to do great. But then it's like, no, this is a business. This is my lifestyle, and I'm going to ask.
So how long are we paying dues before we start asking for what we think we deserve?
I think that's different for everyone.
Yeah.
I do. A part of what I struggled with the most until I didn't was that I felt like I was on the fringes of every norm that I was involved in. Like, I'm playing at this level in the classical world, but I don't have the same pedagogy. And so people are like, where did you come from? Which is its own sense of isolation. But I also, like, because I've been on my own since I was 19, like, there are things that I just can't be vague about and have never been able to be vague in the way that if it has felt like everyone around me has. Like, there are people, even to this day, I have colleagues who are also Black, but who I can't really, like, I don't have a shared experience with because they grew up in the city and I moved here with nothing. And so if I'm taking work, or there were a few years where I spent in corporate marketing to get to the other side of an apartment scam after I worked on a ship for a year. Like, there are people who would be right next to me who have no idea why I'm walking on eggshells for certain things. Even something as simple as, like, I'm a violinist. The industry of luthiers and repair work for stringed instruments is laced in classism, and it has caused me so much trauma. But I could turn to somebody next to me and they could say, oh, you have this bow? Like, I just went to her because she's just better with these bows, and then, like, this bow. And I have no idea what they're talking about because I haven't had time to know. And I haven't had time to sit there and, like, hem and haw about, ooh, what's my rate? Like, there are certain paradoxes that I've felt like no one can understand in a way that COVID forced people to understand. And so coming out of it, the thing that I've noticed both as a contractor and as a performer is that people who before were terrified to bring up pay or terrified to even ask, why is the check late? When is the check getting here? Like, are now, that's not enough for me. That's not a high enough rate for me coming out of the lockdown. And so in that way, I found it very, like, kind of even the playing field a little bit. And I think in the end worked to, like, push all of our rates up, push what people are expecting and push what people are paying. And it made it really easy for me to be like, no, I'm not doing that. Not at that pay rate, sorry.
I increased my rate since COVID
Oh, absolutely.
because I found out what my worth really was.
Also, the stakes are too high.
100%.
Work's not
Everybody
worth
needed to
going
be entertained.
Yeah, right.
But I guess so before we talk about, like, negotiating rates and asking for what you want, I mean discussing pay amongst ourselves so that we know what we should be being offered.
Yeah.
You know
I
what I'm
used to
saying?
do that. Yeah, and I think that's interesting because when I was coming up, I talked about it with my colleagues because nobody told me not to. And I got shushed a lot. And there were people who are like, if you continue to be this outspoken about stuff, like, I'm not going to give your name out. Like, people who shared my complexion who were just like, I would love to pass your name along, but you talk too much about people owing you this and checks bouncing and this and that. And now it's flipped. And so I don't know. That's why I say I don't think there is an age. I don't know.
I think just seeing it being done,
Yeah.
witnessing it. I think it's like that. The more time you have of kind of like, plus once you get the same gig again, you kind, like, say for example you do like the Grammys like twice in a row, you kind of know what to expect. Like, am I gonna get, like I said, like 2 or 3 checks out of this? Is this royalties? Is it just a one-time pay? You kind of know what to expect, especially when you're kind of in that realm or like whatever realm you're in, And also, like, literally just speaking, being able to feel that space that you can talk about it and not being told that I can't hire you again, for example. So, like, finding your Jess, finding your Brandee, like, just, and, like, knowing who, because I do agree you can't just talk amongst any and everybody. You can't.
I have a question, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Why don't we open up
Yeah.
the room for questions at this time?
Question
Seems to be
time.
organic.
Thank you.
Natural transition.
Now I'm off topic because I forgot what my question was, but now I'm going to go somewhere else.
Okay.
Like, if I have, let's say I have Dee Dee Bridgewater on my album, and then I have a student on my album.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want my student to go to Dee Dee Bridgewater and ask her how much money she got paid.
And that's not what I mean. You know how I said you don't want to be on a gig, like, so I don't want Gabby asking Jess what she's getting paid,
Okay, I see,
right? Because it's not appropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we can talk about what should we be getting for having discussions?
Yeah.
What should we be getting for orchestra jobs?
Yeah.
What should we be getting for weddings? What should we be getting for concerts? What should we be getting for club dates?
I definitely try and keep it to like a one-on-one thing. Like if somebody, Yeah, and to Brandee's point, I think that with people having to be more informed, and there are more people establishing multiple flows of income now, and that was more common than when we were coming up. Like the fact that you can't, unless you really got it going on or you have support, it's really next to impossible to just do this one thing without having cultivated. And so I think, I tend to not discuss what I'm making, but I think that, and I find as a contractor that the younger generation is very instinctive with what they will and won't talk about. Like, I've had to deal with a lot less, like, people violating an NDA off the fly because they just want to post, or telling the person next to them what they're, like, I almost never have to deal with that now, because I find that this generation is hyper aware of their own income and, like, what's coming in, what's coming out. And they're very, like, here's what I want to put out to the world, and I know that, and I'm not going to step outside of this. This is my brand. Boom. Like, I didn't start posting the way these kids are posting until, like, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I didn't learn that. We weren't trained for that. And so I think I trust intuition a lot, but I've also been burned a lot. And so that's also why, and I've been burned by kids. So, like, that's also why I keep it to very, like, one-on-one. And then if something goes wrong, like somebody's pay is late, then we're going to chat it up, you know? But, like, yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah, it's kind of like how I said, like, kind of just knowing, you said intuition, but kind of like how I said, just like knowing you cannot just walk in an establishment and then just go speak to Miss Bridgewater, for example. You got to know your variables as well. Like, you have to be realistic with yourself too, you know? People do, and people, you know. But also for me too, one good thing has been kind of like going to the source. And what I mean by that is, like, if I've done union work, I'm talking to a union rep at this point, you know? So I have tried to educate myself in that way, so I don't actually have to speak to someone on the gig, for example, or even wonder, or, like, accept a gig wondering what am I getting paid, because some people will not tell you. And you show up because it sounds great, but then, you know, you get your turnout and it is what it is because you took the gig. But yeah, so for example, like I said, it's kind of like going to the source, do your research. I think as a general thing, like trying to invest in our lives, we literally start to learn about the stock and, like, investing and, like, how to just invest in ourselves, but also grow ourselves. So yes, go to your sources. Find your sources, and figure out what research you can do so you can actually be on top, so you can accept a nice union gig without having to wonder what are the strict parameters surrounding it.
Nice. Does anyone have any more questions? Yeah?
I have a question. Mm-hmm. It's not about money, though.
That's okay.
That's great.
So
Even better.
you guys have talked about generational differences and how, like, you can't talk to everybody about certain problems. And I feel like as, like, a young person in this community, a lot of times, like, you're not aware of, like, some of the older people who might be, like, a little problematic until someone kind of, like, pulls you aside and is like, hey, you know, like, you might not want to be involved with, like, A or B. So, like, how do you kind of approach, like, building community with younger, especially, like, younger Black women, and, like, trying to, you know, keep this, like, feeling like a safe environment? Because I know a lot of people in my age group are like, sometimes I want to quit because I can't deal with some of these aspects. So.
You mean like the email that's not answered because it was 501?
I think it's kind of like, hey, by the way, I think it's kind of like walking in that function and being that person, you know, because, like I said, when we were talking about appearances and things as that sort, it's like when you walk in an establishment, you should exude what you want, and, like, you want that community, for example, so you should be that person that's willing to demonstrate that community and what that might look like to somebody who is also on the gig but does not know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. So I think the best way is maybe not even always going in with the expectation that I'm going to find my community here, I'm going to find a great friend, X, Y, and Z. Like, if it happens, it happens. And I think sometimes it happens over time. So it may not even happen on that gig. But I can say your safest bet for sure, and personally speaking, is walking in that room and being that community that you want to see and that you want to be a part of. Because sometimes people will cling to you for that. And then say, for example, you have like 10 people that want to talk to you and that do want to like work with you, play with you, and create and all these things. But not all of them turn out to be with the best intentions. Best intentions in terms of what suits you personally. And I think from there you kind of start to discern and you kind of get to pick and choose of what you want to be a part of, who you want to create with, what you want to create, and things as such. And you might end up finding yourself building a community and having that person that you can ask, for example, like, what did you get paid? Or like, hey, what are the tunes for tomorrow, for example? Or like, you've done this gig before, what can I expect? Let me know. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I know for me in contracting, I see myself as kind of a bridge between what I call the pathmaker generation and the next generation. And I find that Brandee will tell you, I'm obsessed with boundaries and making sure we know what's business and what's not, like what's professional and what's not. I've had to be that way. And I credit the time that I spent working in corporate marketing because I find the phrase, would you do this in a cubicle, to be super powerful. It brings people back to center. And I think that clean, neutral approach has, not that I think I know, I've met some of the most iconic women on the scene who have felt very unseen because they haven't felt open to express themselves in the same way, and they haven't felt as valued or as seen. And in just the clarity of being very professional and being graciously uncompromising about things, I've had players approach me to say, like, I love what you're doing. That's it. And then when I see them again the next day, then there's like even more opening up, and it becomes very organic, and there aren't these like divisions between older players and young. Like, that's not a thing to me. It's mostly like, as a contractor, I'm understanding human nature. And I understand that when a person enters a gig with certain conditionings, as long as there's somebody there that can like kind of see through that and just strip it down to bare bones basic, like the majority of those conditionings come because they're at work, but surrounded by people who aren't treating it like work. And I think that this time that we're in kind of allows a unique space in that way. And a lot of them have been like, look, my daughter this, my daughter that, but I didn't. And I'm like, but it doesn't matter. Like, we're all here now. And what can we learn from you? And those conversations that happen are both stimulating to our path makers, but also it kind of really just like I said, like neutralizes everything so that everyone there can come from a professional place and make sure that we're all getting the same treatment.
That's good leadership.
Oh,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's important.
Yes?
So I want to first say thank you so much for your time and for sharing these thoughts with us. The question that I had was, if we're talking about people in the community who have at various times made you not feel welcome or not feel safe, and you talked earlier about pivoting, you could decide to just not engage with those people and whatnot, but you can pivot and they're still there, So I wanted to ask basically, how do you expect your peers who have different set of privileges than you to act in the knowledge that there are people out there who emit an unsafeness about them, where they are not so welcoming? Like, what do you expect of people around you who are maybe not experiencing the same type of treatment because of your womanhood or anything else? Like, how do you expect other people to?
Don't expect. Don't expect anything from anybody else. And it's a conversation that I was also having very recently, is that you are responsible for yourself, not for someone else. I mean, until, of course, the obvious circumstances in your family, whatever. But don't expect anything from anyone else. When I'm the only black woman on a gig, I'm not expecting, my male peer to treat me a certain way. It would be nice, common courtesy, all these things and morals that we instill in ourselves and that our parents do, or whoever, guardian, whatever person, a relative, anybody who is that person for you, but also understand that that other person may not have that. And that's okay, because I feel like if we get too invested in what we want out of somebody else in any aspect of life, we might end up disappointed, but then that's okay, So kind of like going way, way back to the beginning of this talk I was talking about embracing things. Embrace that aspect of yourself. Like for me, I started embracing that I was the only woman. And a lot of times I was the only black woman, and I loved and embraced when another woman came apart and so on, because sometimes women do like to be gatekeepers because some of us have literally had to be the only woman. So some women do get comfortable with being the only woman and will not accept another, But I would say, like I keep saying, don't expect anything from anyone else.
Did you mean your question in a way like, what can someone do to advocate for you?
Well, yeah, and it sounds like Gabby's answer was like, even the step of advocating is making an assumption, right? Like,
sorta. I mean, in terms of advocating, like I feel like we could want that and we can encourage, and I feel like if we have that power to know somebody, say for example, if we see something going on in front of us, and maybe it might not reflect the same as myself being a black woman, but maybe this white man next to me, so to say, has that privilege, I would be like, you can step up.
yeah.
And kind of like speak up about that. I feel like in terms of advocating, we should be vocal when we can. Even if we are that person that might not be heard, we should step up, and we should try and educate somebody else on what that looks like to step up for someone else, or even if it ends up being yourself, which then is tied into like the expectation aspect. Don't expect, but be that person. So they're kind of tied into however you want to correlate.
I think one really just in your face example is literally the pandemic,
Yeah.
spring of 2020, when all of a sudden people were like, "Oh, racism? I had no idea."
Talk about it. I want to talk about it.
But then you had those friends that were literally reaching out, trying to learn, trying to help, and then you had the friends that were like silent,
Yes.
and it was like a little awkward.
Right.
Like, I didn't expect you to like do anything or say anything, but
It was like I saw you posting about that other thing though.
I
but-
know.
Yeah.
I was like, I scratched my head, like, geez, okay, just mental note.
I don't know. I think every situation's different.
Yeah.
And the truth is, you have to take the risk of deciding, because we took the risk to be there. It might not go well. You could be my stand partner and turn to me and be like, blah, 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 blah. And I could be like, leave me alone. I just want to work. Or somebody could try something and you might be an advocate in that moment. And I'm like, great, I'm glad this person was here. It could be different, like, by the hour. Like, sometimes I'm playing on Hollywood sound stages and I'm the only black person in the orchestra. But because the people I'm around, in just the way that they live their lives, not because of going out of their way, just I know, I've seen it. These people are informed, and it's a very organic relationship, and it's not even like I feel safe or not. I just feel like I can show up and do my job. Mm-hmm. To me, that's the safest thing. There doesn't need to be all this stuff unless something goes wrong. If you're like part of the upper administration and you know that you've hired a group of black players, and you also know that something weird is going on, you might not necessarily need to even go to them and be like, this is wrong. Are there strings you can pull? Is there a voice? Can you make a noise without it being a noise? Okay, do that. Still, you run the risk of not being seen as an ally or being seen as doing too much. But that's the risk that you sign up to take, because we took the risk to show up, and we had to take the risk to shift the standard. I think that's That's my biggest thing. I don't think it's possible to say, is there one way to be or one way not to be? I think that if you're doing the work, that is readily apparent to anybody you're dealing with. And also the last thing I'll say is about like projections and stuff. I learned from my grandmother that that's their business.
Yep.
If I'm showing up and I know I'm showing up at 100%, which so many of us have conditioned that that's the only way. My dad taught me that way. For you to be seen as the same, you need to be better, period. You need to be, he used to say, at least 30% better. Like, that doesn't really leave you, you know? And so to even the scale, I think you have to be willing to take the risk. And whatever happens from that is what happens. Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I have two questions. First of all, just as a general thing, I'd like to say thank you for presenting this forum because you put a light on a lot of issues that I wasn't aware of. Certainly the fact that I'm a musician myself, and just the fact that women, particularly in jazz, have not gotten the credit that they deserve. The Melvin Listons, and Mary Lou Williams, those type of people. I'm glad that that's happening now.
Yeah.
Second thing is I'd like to know where you guys are from. And the third thing is recently, Esperanza Spalding, very talented musician who wears big hair on stage and plays a wonderful bass and sings lovely. Recently, she left her position at Harvard because of a disagreement with the administration about how her course should be presented. I'd like to know as women, what do you guys think about that?
Can I jump in?
Jump.
Well, I'm originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, but I've been, Southern girl.
I'm from Rock Hill, South Carolina.
Okay, right down the street, literally like 20 minutes outside. Okay. Yeah. But I've been in New York for about 12 years, 13 years.
What high school did you go to?
Well, I graduated from Providence, but I really claim Northwest School of the Arts. Yeah. I think that optically, what her decision and how it was presented to the world is extremely important. I think it's extremely powerful. I know that she has been famous for a long time, and there's a lot behind that. And so I think that it's hard to have just one opinion on it because I understand I've only had to be of two minds. I think, we have to be done?
No, I'm sorry, but could you just speak? Because you know what? The live stream can't hear the questions.
Oh, okay.
So she's talking about Esperanza
Okay,
Spalding
yes.
and recently leaving her post at Harvard.
Esperanza very vocally left her post at Harvard. And she did what so many of us have wanted to be able to do for years. She did what many of us have been doing for years, but without the optics, without anybody caring, as it were. She has enough sway, like enough power, and her levity, her name carries enough weight for that to be something and to essentially be a standard that I think we should all work towards. But I know a lot of women who have also been in that position and haven't been able to afford to make such a visible statement against the institution. The institution is so much more powerful than any TikTok trend, than anybody can understand. It goes back so far, and so much of it was actually built against us. So that work, I see her decision as being part of a larger landscape of work that's just gonna have to keep happening and keep happening and keep happening. I don't see it as an end all, but optically I see it as a huge masterstroke for what we're trying to do and for what people want ultimately. We need to all be able to say, it's gotta be this or don't do it. As for someone like myself, for years, I felt that way about certain, like my curriculum in college. I had major issues with that. I took it back to our professors and then tried to propose something else. That may or may not work. I'm still waiting to hear back, and that was like 3 years ago. And if that does happen, that will be installed at my alma mater, but probably nobody outside of my circle will know about it.
What is your alma mater?
A North Carolina School of the Arts. Yeah. Winston-Salem. And so it was thrilling to read. It was thrilling to see. It gives me more hope than I think I can express.
It made my eyes pop out of my head when I read that.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe she's taking a stand like that.
But I think we have to be careful not to then turn to the person next to us and automatically expect for Black women to keep having to make those radical decisions, because then it's just like, this is the labor, you know? A lot of us have been doing that labor, and we'll keep doing that, and we've accepted that. And now I don't need you to also turn to me and be like, so when you gonna quit? Because that's not a realistic question in this country in 2022. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so when you gonna quit? Sometimes I've been asked that question before.
I've been asked that question a lot, and that's a really traumatizing and triggering one.
Especially when it comes from
not in the right
someone
space.
rich. Anyway,
Yeah.
so Joel, did you have a question?
I have a question from the live stream.
Oh.
It says, how do you all feel about adding a general dress code to your technical writers? Do you feel that that is something that would limit your gig requests?
Like,
I don't understand the question.
yeah.
Yeah, you add a
As
dress
a
code to a
contractor?
writer?
I guess.
Does that mean is the gig dressing us?
I don't know.
Or is the question, will they, like, would we ever include in our writer, you can't ask me, or you can't, like, is that?
I don't know.
It's
Interesting.
the viewer's question.
Interpret.
Yeah.
If you're saying, like, we put in our writer, this is what we'll wear, we could do that, but, okay, this is important. If we have a writer, no one's telling us what to wear,
Exactly.
okay?
I don't have one yet.
If we're doing orchestral work, we don't have a writer.
My bosses have one. I don't have one.
The bosses have one.
Right.
So that's not an option if you're playing as a part of another group versus it being your own shebang.
Yeah.
Now it all makes sense.
Yes. Yeah.
Yay. You guys are like awesome. Thank you for the wonderful questions.
Such a
If no
warm
one has any
crowd.
more questions,
I didn't get to ask my question that I was going to ask.
Oh, you remembered?
I remembered my
Yeah.
question.
lay it on us.
Come on.
When you're on a gig
Yes.
and you feel that the performer has really lost their dignity,
When you're on a gig and you feel the performer has really lost their dignity,
how do you handle the situation of coming and going? How do you handle the situation if they ask you to play the gig again? Will you do it? Will you keep your morals? I mean, you know what I'm saying?
What do you
when
mean
is
by
your
that?
dignity-
By losing the
when is-
dignity? I
do you
guess.
mean when your band leader flips out and calls you for a gig again?
When is enough is enough?
Oh, when is
As far as dignity and
What you're willing
when
to
is
do.
enough as far as dignity? I think, you know, the goal in general is to be able to get enough different, have enough different streams of income so that you don't have to take that job again. I mean, in an ideal world, you don't want to just make money doing one thing because that one thing can fall through, or you've got to deal with this
Yeah.
crazy person
I just
or
want the choice.
situation. But I ideally want to create multiple opportunities, multiple options, so that one can go.
Yeah, I feel like as soon as it starts to impact your character, and if it's, like I said before too, like if it's no longer making you happy, no longer serving you, then I think that's answer enough.
I hear that and I'm like, that ain't real, but I understand.
Ideally, like, yeah. Realistically,
It's not
it is.
serving me.
Perfect example, though.
I
of
feel like
exactly
that's
what we
real.
talked about.
Yeah, I feel like
it.
that's perfectly real because,
We're telling them.
I know,
yeah,
I know.
that's the dignity you're asking.
Joel's like the generational thing.
That's
I really
part of
think
the
that's important.
that's part of the dignity that you're asking. So I feel like quite literally, once it starts compromising you, your morals, and your dignity, literally, then it's enough. Of course, be responsible realistically with yourself. Something else I also mentioned: be realistic with yourself
so
to
that your
know,
rent
like,
is paid.
Yes. So be responsible to know that if I cut this out, that's no longer serving me, artistically, mentally, emotionally, X, Y, and Z, do I have something else to fall back on? So be realistic, but be true to yourself. And I just feel like that's honestly, truly so big being in any craft, any field that you're in, because we can so easily get lost in just wanting to pay our rent, just wanting to do X, Y, and Z, that we do settle for things that don't serve us, and we don't even realize sometimes that it no longer served us. That's for a relationship, that's for gigs, that's for anything. Yeah. So for me, it's not even about paying the rent. It's about, is it serving me? Is it serving the artist that I want to be? Because I don't have to do this, you know? I want to do this because it's not a job for me, but it does pay my bills. So it's about, like I keep saying, does it serve me? Is it making me happy on this gig? It's not just to pay my rent, because we're not just doing gigs. We're not just trying to have gigs just to pay our rent. We're trying to get something out of it, because this is our life. It's not just a job. We don't just somehow clock out at some point. We are always, to me, I'm always a musician. When I literally, like, when I used to take the train, when I would hear anything, if I heard two beeps from a car alarm, I'm thinking of how that applies to a song I heard. Like, who does that, you know? So for me, I'm a musician 24/7. I'm so many things, but that's why I'm saying it's so important, and your question is so important, to focus on your dignity, and if that serves you, and it's so much more than just doing it for the money, doing it for X, Y, and Z. So, of course, if this is your craft, you have enough time to create a plan, to create other streams of income, because that is the responsible part that we have to be realistic with ourselves about. But do things that make you happy, that serve you, that grow the artist that you are. And I just can't emphasize that enough. Thank you for my TED Talk. Thank you.
So we did get the light flicker.
Oh.
I know what that meant.
Well, you had something to say, yeah.
Yes.
You two didn't tell me your hometowns. Brandee, I know where you from.
Well, make sure that we have papers with the bios. And I feel like Gabby's first sentence is like, BK, stand up. Like, that's like the first sentence.
I'm from Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, born
That's
and
what I'm
raised,
saying. Read her
flautist,
bio. It's the
Gabrielle.
first sentence.
Can't you tell?
It's our first sentence. But Jessica, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Gabby, thank you so much. Thank you
you.
all for coming out. Hopefully we can continue this conversation. Joel, thank you for inviting us to be here.
Thanks, Joel.
Ryan and everyone at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. Martin and Anthony back there, thanks for setting this all up for us.
And thank you to Brandee Younger for leading the conversation tonight.
Thank you.
All right, everyone get home safe. JMIH.org. You can keep in touch with us and find out about all of our upcoming events. We have a show tomorrow night here with the Miles Davis Estate. India Owens is